us in studio is Betty Biodiesel. Love the costume.
Thank you.
Well, Betty, tell me, how did Betty Biodiesel, how did the character get started?
In 2002, I was presenting to a group of New College students.
Okay.
I got my Green MBA from New College, which has now moved to Dominican, and was talking with them and was sort of asking the audience, or at least curious as to why a woman like myself was involved in a fuel industry, a very male-dominated industry. And somewhere out of my head space, whatever, came the word Betty Biodiesel. So it was probably a couple months later that the head crown came to my head from a friend of mine, because I was emceeing another event and wanted to be a little costume oriented, because I grew up very much interested in wearing costumes and doing that since a very early age. So the sunflower became a synonymous connection to the fact that sunflower oil and oil crops is what can make biodiesel and put into diesel cars.
Could you give us just a brief rundown on biodiesel? I think a lot of people have the image of Willie Nelson pulling up in his van, plugging in what looks like a gas pump, and it's actually biodiesel, and off he goes.
Yes.
Give us Biodiesel 101.
Okay. So biodiesel is really the way you create it is that you take a vegetable oil. So it's either a sunflower, a canola oil, mustard seed, coconut, even all the way up to the algae oil, which is the most exciting and yet not quite here yet.
Okay, so French fry oil.
Yeah, French fry oil. You can use recycled oil. That's the one that mostly in California is being used.
All right.
You take that, you blend in two catalysts, which are methanol and sodium methylate.
Okay.
You heat it, mix it, and what that does is it takes the long hydrocarbon chain of that vegetable oil, breaks it into, the glycerin is one part, the heavier part of the oil, and the methyl ester is another. Methyl ester is also known as biodiesel.
Okay.
So then you can put that into any already existing diesel engine.
Well, listeners, you may be asking yourselves about this time, why are we even talking about biodiesel? Well, here are a couple of facts. If you take a look at Calvert's Alternative Energy Mutual Fund, there is a reason there's a mutual fund out there for it. There is a reason that we are now investing in biodiesel. And if you don't know what that reason is, go fill up your car, and then we'll talk after that. This is a much cleaner way, a more efficient way, a more effective way, and dare I say, more renewable?
Oh yes, definitely renewable. So whenever the plant is growing in the field, it's consuming all the carbon dioxide. I work with kids a lot, and we always talk about carbon dioxide and what plants eat and the photosynthesis process and all that. But obviously where it really comes home to matter is that everything that they eat, wear, touch in their classroom, other than if it came off a tree, pretty much got there because of a diesel truck.
Exactly.
You know, some kind of form of transportation, whether it was an ocean-going vessel or a 18-wheeler that came across the country, that everything that they connect to. So how does a plant growing in the field, then getting processed into oil, then being used at a restaurant, then being converted into biodiesel, what does it matter to them? And to kids in school buses, it matters a lot.
Well, we're going to talk about the school bus campaign that Betty has come up with, but before I do that, I wanted to touch on the company behind it, Blue Sky Biofuels. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it? And then how did Biofuels for Schools get started?
Great. Well, and the two kind of happened independently, but now they're really joining forces together.
Okay.
Blue Sky Biofuels, founded by Patrick McIntyre and Ralph McIntyre, two brothers.
Okay.
I really feel like it should be called Mac Fuels, but that was already taken. So Blue Sky Biofuels was started by these two people, that one of them had a lot more of the financial backing, and then the other one had a lot more of the biodiesel knowledge. And started up in operation over here off High Street, pretty close to where we're sitting right now.
Okay.
And so in Oakland actually is existing the first biodiesel processing facility, fully permitted, because there have been others in the past, but not quite permitted, to provide biodiesel in the Bay Area. About 5 or 6 years ago, I met Ralph McIntyre. I was doing my own independent thing, doing the Betty Biodiesel, starting cooperatives up in Sonoma County of driving on biodiesel.
Yeah.
And so really started focusing in my Green MBA on my thesis as the Biofuels for Schools campaign. Really needed a project, obviously, to work on.
True.
So finding out that school buses are inherently pretty toxic inside, is really what spurred my idea of thinking of Biofuels for Schools campaign, and really connecting the existing diesel engine in the school bus with the biodiesel opportunity of reducing emissions. And so then what was born out of that was the Biofuels for Schools campaign. And in the last year and a half, Biofuels for Schools campaign and Blue Sky Biofuels have teamed up as a for-profit and a non-profit, which is a really more current model of companies, you know, utilizing their for-profit, their business. They have to look at the bottom line, but also looking at the social and environmental aspects. Social being our kids are out on the roads, 24 million of them every day, exposed to diesel emissions and crankcase emissions inside the school bus.
Could you just give our listeners a brief tidbit on ethanol? Because I always thought ethanol was the way to go until I saw what is called the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico.
Just to be clear, ethanol is like taking a corn or a sugar cane. Typically in our country we grow corn. We've heard a lot about Brazil growing sugar cane. So it takes a sugar, just like you're making an alcohol. Ethanol is an alcohol. And so you're taking that, you're fermenting it down, and you're making an alcohol. You wouldn't use an oilseed crop to do that. So a lot of confusion about the word of biofuels, even though biofuels for schools, it actually rhymes better than biodiesel for schools. It is one of those things where it is a biofuel, either ethanol or biodiesel, but different feedstock crops. So corn is to ethanol, is to gas, as sunflower or canola or coconut is to biodiesel, is to diesel engines. So those two different fields. And there's been some definite land grabs of the ethanol for the corn market. So that's probably what we're talking about with the Gulf of Mexico.
Now, you've gotten the campaign going for the Biofuels for School. What have the results been?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about biodiesel, at least in California, is that we don't grow soy crops. You know, biodiesel, as much as ethanol has its own inherent problems, so does biodiesel. So I don't want to come across making biodiesel sound like the end-all, be-all. It is definitely not. It's a diverse, just like you work with your investment portfolio, you'd work with a diversity of choices rather than put your money all into one pot. You want to put your money and spread it out. Just like the solutions that we've got for our world, ethanol made from cellulosic grain is much more ideal. However, commercially, we're just not there yet. We're in the lab, we're figuring that out. Just like with biodiesel, predominantly around our country, soy was actually what started biodiesel, because they had a glut of the oil in the late 80s, early 90s, and they used that oil to make biodiesel. The Soy Association paid the $2 million to get the EPA certification, so they really birthed the industry. However, we don't have enough soy to drive us out of our, our consumption of oil. So the way that this Biofuels for Schools campaign and the Blue Sky Biofuels is connecting is that in California, we don't grow soy. So we don't even have our own feedstock available here, and yet we're, as a country, as a state, we use the amount of petroleum that we use is second to the whole nation. So with 35 million people in California, we use 5 billion gallons of diesel fuel. In just the Bay Area, we use 500 million. And there's only 10 million gallons of waste oil from restaurants or cattle feed or whatever available. So that means, as you can see, do the math.
Demand. It's easy enough.
So of course we thought the best use is to get it into the school buses, because if you're only going to have so much of something available, where should it go first? And I think that's a question we don't ask.